On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by 5280 Life Sciences Consulting. If you need help setting your strategy, meeting your operational goals, or you are selecting and implementing critical technology in your business, we should talk. Visit 5280lifescience.com to schedule a meeting and find out more.
Today on the Life Science Success Podcast, I'd like to welcome Preveen Ramamoorthy. Welcome, Preveen.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
By way of my interest, I had this tremendous interest when I was in high school to become a doctor, a physician. And after I read some articles on HIV research and azidothymidine and all the drugs that were coming out in the early 90s, I decided to change path and become a researcher, because I thought as a researcher, as a scientist, I could influence so many more lives than as a physician seeing one patient at a time. So that sort of continues even today. I'm still wired like a physician in a way. In terms of what drives me, I'm very passionate about translating ideas and concepts into precision medicine therapeutics and diagnostics. So that's really what drives me. What I enjoy the most is the entrepreneurial environments and envisioning the future, working towards the future. I'm always someone who is obviously trying to execute on the present, but always dreaming about the future. And I would say I'm a lifelong learner, and I want to be that way. I love challenges, new learning opportunities. That's why I've traversed all the segments in the biopharma space, right from biologics development to diagnostics to devices and now cell and gene therapies.
Yeah, it's being a continual learner in our current space is something that almost seems like it's a natural demand anymore, because There's so much information. I know I have a lot of tools that help me get all the right information in our space, but for sure there's a lot going on. You happen to mention the entrepreneurial spirit, a little bit of a background in terms of where you are currently and what are you doing right now?
So right now I'm working on two things. One is the area of stem cells to regenerate pancreatic beta cells to treat diabetes patients. And as part of being a faculty member at the University of Colorado, I'm also working on a cancer immunotherapy, which employs a gene-engineered tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte. And we can get into details, but essentially the idea is to remove tumor-homing lymphocytes from the tumor and engineer them to make the tumor lymphocytes even more aggressive to attack the tumor.
Yeah, so I haven't really interviewed anybody yet on the podcast that does anything in the realm of diabetes. So this is a new area for me. In terms of the things that you're working on, is this all new in this space, using stem cells in the space, or is it something that there are several new things that are coming in the space for type 1 and type 2 diabetes?
This is fairly new, I would say. One of the most pioneering companies called Sema Therapeutics is already in clinical trials right now. They've got the RMAT designation from the FDA. They're on an accelerated path to the clinic. And a few years ago, they were acquired by Vertex for a very large sum of money. So I think that tells you that the potential is there to take stem cells and make them into any type of cells that you desire. And in this case, we're talking about cells that produce insulin. Mm-hmm. But one could think about stem cells that could turn into nerve tissue. And those sorts of advances are also happening. And that's what's most exciting about this space.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your journey from India to Clemson. So you went to Clemson University, and I just find it interesting when somebody leaves one geography to go to school in another. It's one thing whenever that geography is still connected by land and doesn't have an ocean lying in between. Mm-hmm. But that's quite a distance for you.
Yeah, in the mid-90s, when I finished my master's graduate program in medical microbiology, which was, again, a very clinically oriented program, all of us at that time did not have much to do in India. Either you went to graduate school in India and then still came to the US for your fellowship, or you came to the US or Australia or UK for your PhDs or fellowships. So I happen to have two of my former mentors and senior students who were already enrolled at Clemson, and I thought they'd be of tremendous help to me and they could continue to mentor me. And we didn't have the internet in those days, so really you had to rely a bit on word of mouth as to how the school is, what's the cost of living, which was also an important factor to consider coming from there. So that's how I got into Clemson, and I knew that they had a pretty reasonably good biological sciences program, and areas of interest for me were in viral immunology and such. And so I think that's how I went into Clemson.
Yes, in terms of biology and virology, really, what led you to your role at Regenerative Medical Solutions?
That's a long but hopefully an interesting story, I can say, but it's an interesting journey where a lot of my personal experiences ended up defining what I pursued, what sort of opportunity I pursued in most cases. As I said, initially my passion was in viral immunology, and in high school I in fact won a statewide prize for my work showing how HIV hijacks the immune system. So that stuck to me a lot. So I was always interested in working at the interface of virology and immunology. So when I landed in Clemson, I could not find that exact fit. So I was a little bit disappointed, but then my mentors and friends said, listen, you're in the US, you have to open up your brain, you have to be open to things. And so I said, okay, let me now continue to explore. And so I did a bunch of these PhD, pre-dissertation PhD projects, right? One on DNA repair, I did one on DNA fingerprinting. And finally, I was picked by a professor to work in the area of breast cancer therapeutics, wherein we take prolactin and we modified it into an antagonist. And that became a potent drug for breast cancer, at least in the test tubes and in the animal models. During that time, my mother was diagnosed with glioblastoma at the age of 50. And so that was devastating to me. But I found that my PhD project helped me cope better with my mother's cancer, because I felt like I was helping patients with cancer. I felt like I was fighting the cause in a way with my work. And I began to think, how could we have detected this cancer earlier in my mom's case? And I always, what hit me was gene-based diagnostics. Perhaps we could have found something if we had done some sort of gene-based diagnostics for early detection. And fortunately, I was recruited to join Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, which is the US Army's largest biological research facilities, where I was inducted into a project, a DARPA-funded project, where the immune system was being used as a biosensor to detect different viruses, bacteria, and all of that. And the way we were doing it was we're snooping in on the immune response. And as the immune response takes place, there's a bunch of molecular signatures that are put out there in the way the cells respond to a certain virus, a bacteria, or fungus. And by using gene chips to snoop in on that, we were able to actually diagnose which virus it is, so which bacteria it is. And so that drew me a lot, because I thought I could use the same principles to detect cancer earlier. And what was going on, and I was anyways oriented towards industry, and got a call from MedImmune, where my former mentor and friend was there, and I wanted to get into drug development. And that's where I learned all the basics, as they say, the 101 or the ABCs of drug and vaccine development. And I also could work on some cancer therapy projects and all of that. But even then, during that time at MedImmune, I was constantly interested in biomarkers and how one could bring the diagnostic element to accelerate therapeutic development. And it used to be called translational medicine groups in those days.
Yep.
And I could not find any such opportunities, but I knew that diagnostics was the key for therapeutic success, wherein one could target certain sets of people or with a certain genetic profiles in order for us to be able to hit them with the right drug at the right time for the right patient. And again, fortuitously, I got recruited by National Jewish Health in Denver. So that's what brought me from California to Denver. where I had this opportunity to build a personalized medicine diagnostics department and integrate it with the institution-wide personalized medicine initiative at National Jewish. I loved this job because it was 3 jobs, not 1 job. One was a faculty member, the other was an entrepreneur trying to build a whole new program and also try to be financially independent. So become a contract research organization, develop tests and figure out reimbursements and all of that. And again, the most precious part of this job that I still miss is being a laboratory director, being able to work with physicians on what tests to order. And then once the tests were ordered, how to provide them with the clinical decision support, the consulting. So I really took part in clinical care. And I think to this day, I would say must have at least signed more than 40,000 plus patient reports, ranging from cancer to infectious disease to so many different rare diseases and such. And during that time, I got recruited. About 7 years I was at National Jewish, and then I got recruited by an Indian bioinformatics powerhouse called Strand Life Sciences. And they wanted me to help them transform from being a bioinformatics company into a brick and mortar next-gen sequencing-based diagnostics company in India. And the mission was to engage in affordable innovation where we brought the price of these sophisticated genomic tests to at least 1/4 of the cost of what was in the US for cancer testing as well as for rare disease testing, because the affordability was very low. The costs were very high for people to afford it. So I think we ended up doing it very well, and it ended up producing a situation where even middle-class people can now afford these tests. And a few years before that, my child had been diagnosed with autism. So I tried a few genomic tests. And to me, the answer was genomics can tell you what is wrong, what's the molecular switch that's gone on. But what can we do about it was this constant thought in my mind. And I thought, okay, maybe stem cells might be a way to do it. And so in my life, I've always looked at the universe and prayed and said, here's what I want to do, here's where I want to go. And somehow the path opens up for me. Though I've never been trained in that particular area. Even the National Jewish job was something I never trained in. I'd never run a clinical lab, and I got it. Similarly, Terumo BCT, $1 billion cell and gene therapy and transfusion medicine company. The CEO was my mentor, and I worked with him for many months before he thought he could recruit me into lead science and clinical globally. And that's how I got into the area of cell and gene therapy with iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells, mesenchymal stromal cells, hematopoietic stem cells, CAR-Ts, worked with companies like Novartis and Kite in helping them succeed with their CAR-T programs. And that continues to be my inspiration even today, is the world of cell and gene therapy. And subsequently, I got recruited to Regenerative Medical Solutions, where, as we spoke about, working on iPSCs and how to differentiate them into beta cells. And continue to think about how can I get into the space of making brain organoids and neural cells, or how could I use gene therapy to help my child? Sure. And so I've had the benefit of working with or being in touch with some really thought leaders in this space, like Mahendra Rao, like Alison Motori at UC San Diego, who's actually making brain organoids and such.
Very nice. Yeah, this is the place to be right now with regards to personalized medicine, for sure. And it seems to me like we've got just such tremendous opportunity right now. One, we can see what's happening in your DNA and RNA. Now, to your point, right? Can we actually implement things that'll let us do something about it? Seems like that next natural step. And I feel like a lot of people are taking those steps. Do you have additional things or thoughts that you would have in terms of personalized therapies that you'd like to see in the world?
I think you're beginning to see the tip of the iceberg emerge in the form of tremendous success with the chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapies. The clinical efficacy of it has just been unbelievable. And now you have many more different generations of CAR-T, variants of CAR-T coming up. T-cell receptor therapeutics coming up. And the one that I'm working on at the University of Colorado is also a very interesting way in which you can hit solid tumors, because CAR-Ts have been most successful with liquid tumors, but CAR-Ts have had some issues with penetrating the tumor microenvironment, the fortress of the tumor. And so I think T cells that have been in a tumor microenvironment, like the tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, might be a great way to go in terms of treating solid tumors. And so Iovance, for instance, is an exceptionally well-capitalized company in the US doing some great work. They licensed their technology from Dr. Rosenberg's work, I would say Dr. Rosenberg is a pioneer in this space of cancer immunotherapy. He's been working on it for so long. But yeah, so I think on that side, that's happening. And then when you look at the gene therapy side, it's really exciting as well, where we all know there's about 7,000 rare diseases in the world, and of course, innumerable number of mutations and that need to be targeted. But using adeno-associated viruses or lentiviruses, one can target them and make the gene correction. And then, of course, you have this whole CRISPR-Cas and gene editing technologies that have come out. So all in all, phenomenally exciting time. I feel very grateful, very lucky to be in this time, at this moment, being able to at least work on these types of things.
Yeah, just yesterday, I interviewed Deborah Barton from Charisma, and they're focused on CAR-M therapy. And I certainly have spent a little bit of time talking to the team at the University of Colorado as well about just their work in CRISPR just sounds amazing. And to somebody like me who doesn't really do this on a day-to-day basis, just getting to hear those portions of the story of how we're working on therapies and what a tremendous opportunity it's going to be for the future. Yeah. What can you tell me about your dissertation from Clemson and your talks about HPRL, human prolactin, and how it would impact breast cancer?
Yeah, the work was very inspiring at that time. In fact, my advisor had invented a growth hormone receptor antagonist, which actually made it into the market, took the growth hormone, just made one amino acid change in the growth hormone, and it became an antagonist. So it was used to treat acromegaly in people with excessive secretion of growth hormones. My advisor thought that since growth hormone and prolactin they have a lot of similarities in the protein sequences and structure, and he thought perhaps we could engineer prolactin and way that it becomes an antagonist. And prolactin is also known to be a growth factor for breast cancer. Of course, the most popular growth factor in breast cancer is estrogen. So we were some of the early folks that thought prolactin had a role to play in this. And someone like Barbara Wanderha from NCI had done a lot of work in this space. And so that's what made us think that we could target it. And again, you make a one amino acid change in prolactin and it becomes a prolactin antagonist. So what it does is it basically, the cancer cell is always looking for growth factors. So prolactin is one of those growth factors. So it's always chugging down as much growth factor as possible so that it can grow and multiply and become a big tumor. So if you block it, you are removing access to the growth factor. You're applying the brakes. And so that's what kills the cancer cell. So what I discovered, original discovery, actually in the middle of the night, classic science experiment, I did this and I saw that I found out how this prolactin antagonist was killing the cancer cell, the breast cancer cell. It was doing it by apoptosis, which is a phenomenally programmed way in which the cell dies. And so it was one of those exciting aha moments when we knew the cells were being killed by the prolactin antagonist, but how were they being killed? It was a good discovery. In any case, it didn't make it to the clinic, or shall I say, I still have some hopes that it will. But the very same principles are used by Herceptin, for instance, where you block the HER2/neu receptor on the breast cancer cell with an antibody. In our case, we used a protein molecule, not an antibody, a protein, whereas the antibody model seems to have taken off really big time, which is really good. So the principle is the same, is how do you block the growth factor signaling, whatever the growth factor is, whether it's EGFR or HER2/neu, or in the case of Avastin, it's VEGF.
Yeah, sure.
Vascular endothelial cell growth factor.
Yeah, it's just Again, I think there's true opportunities to potentially save lives in the end with some of these things, and tremendous find for you in the wee hours of the night. So good job. What are some of the greatest challenges that you're running into today?
I think the big challenges, the way I see it is I don't see the challenges. I actually see the opportunities. We all have challenges. Let's say in today's time, it has been all consumed by COVID-19. So one can sit here and say, oh my God, COVID has destroyed everything for me. Or you can say, what sort of opportunities do I see with COVID? And I'll list a few things. I think one of the things I've noticed in this country is I have not seen a time when doctors, nurses, scientists have been this respected or put on the spotlight. I think we need it. We need to inspire younger folks to take up the STEM career. And I know pop singers and basketball players and football players have occupied a lot of our media limelight. I think I was, in a sense, I was happy to see that. There is true recognition for people who are in this and working in the background just to make a difference in human lives. So I hope this helps the younger generation to be inspired to pursue STEM careers in greater numbers. The other 2 points I wanted to make. One is diagnostics as an industry, as a space, has not received as much attention and respect. Though 70% of the time, clinical decisions are made based on diagnostic tests. But tests have to be cheap. You don't get reimbursed that easily, particularly molecular tests, and genomic tests don't get reimbursed because they are expensive. So I feel like with this COVID, we were caught completely unprepared because we did not have that ecosystem, that model to help diagnostic innovations make it. And I hope there is some lasting change there that is a good one, so that the industry is able to invest in innovations in point of care tests and near patient testing platforms and things like that, which I think home testing is going to become a way of life as we go forward. Home-based testing for a lot of things. And then the other thing is that discrete testing that we do is not going to be useful in detecting diseases earlier. We need a way to continually test ourselves. And so the sensors have to be cheap. The tests have to be easy to do and accessible and connected to some sort of a database and AI interface so that all these interpretations can be automated. So I see a huge revolution happening in that space on the diagnostics front. So though it starts off with COVID, I think it should get into early detection of cancer, early detection of multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, and all sorts of diabetes and all sorts of chronic diseases where we have continual monitoring with all sorts of new technologies that we can go into details at some other point. Vaccines have also been taken for granted. Vaccines have to be cheap. Nobody cared about a vaccine. Now everybody wants a vaccine shot. So I am really, as someone who has worked in the vaccine space, I'm so proud to see how much innovation has happened with vaccines. Again, I'll make the point that it starts off with COVID vaccines, but now when you look at these mRNA vaccines, they can actually be very useful for cancer, for autoimmune diseases, and so many other things. So the delivery platform is working, it's safe. So I think there is going to be a revolution that is going to be already taken off in this area. The other point I also want to make is many of these viral vaccines that are live, that are potentially going to be used for COVID. Again, this whole gene therapy area is also probably going to take off with the ability to manufacture these viruses in a high quality GMP manner. So that those are I would say those are the opportunities I see. On a philosophical note, I feel like we have realized the world is a small village. We are no longer isolated from geography or ethnicity or nationality. A virus thousands of miles away can impact you within a few hours or within a day or two, you'd get it. So I feel like we should all have this global mindset of we're all citizens of the world as opposed to citizens of a particular country, and try to do good for everybody else. Because with COVID, practically you want to vaccinate the whole world. You don't want new strains coming and hitting you again.
Yeah,
so it's a classic.
That 60% around the world, we're not going to have herd immunity. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So this is one thing that has had its devastating effects on people's health, mortality, livelihood, and all of that. But I think the lesson to be learned is we need to reach out and help everybody else get better health care. The world needs to have any poor countries need to be supported in ways. And then this whole climate change, which is not the main topic of discussion. All of those things bind us together as one global village. And so we have to cooperate and engage with the whole world as a whole.
Yeah, and you could see, because to me, it's not just the evolution of COVID that you see now, but for years we've been talking about SARS and MERS, and then now COVID, and then all the different strains of COVID. And it's, to me, it's almost as if these things are going to keep coming, and we need brilliant scientists to continually be working on, okay, so what's next? And to your point, attracting the next generation of science leaders to go do that is important. Also showing people what it might feel like to find a discovery in the middle of the night and how exciting that might be, I think is also a story that needs to continually be told as well.
Totally agree.
If you could have a conversation with any leader about the challenges that you've faced, who would you want to speak with and what would you want to ask about?
I've always been fascinated by spiritual people, though I'm a scientist. I've always constantly been fascinated with spiritual folks. And one of my current gurus is a mystic and yogi. His name is Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev, who founded the Isha Foundation. And it's amazing. All of these folks come from very basic middle-class families, and suddenly over a period of decades, their message reaches millions of people. I'm always fascinated. How do they inspire millions of people? And how do they take on this huge global projects? Mind you, with all volunteers, right? You can't fire any volunteers, my guru says. You have to run this and you make all these huge things happen. Like he's done huge environmental initiatives. He's built a big yoga center and ashram in Tennessee, and so many other things going on. So to me, it's like mind-boggling to think about it. How do you reach that many people? And how do you make that many people follow you? And I'm sure the answer is, once you enlightened and spiritually accomplished, the universe and the world comes together for you in ways that I think someone like myself couldn't even imagine. But it'd be nice to have that sort of conversation.
Very good. And there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. So what inspires you?
My inspiration comes from seeing people who need to be helped, is to have this empathy. As Satya Nadella says, innovation doesn't happen without empathy. And so is to innovate, have this empathy, but also be inspired in a way that you try to want to make a difference in the lives of people who are suffering from whatever disease it is. I'm quite disease agnostic. My own family, I've had cancer, I've had autism, and there are other families that suffer from multiple sclerosis or Alzheimer's or cardiovascular or whatever it is. But the idea is every patient is suffering and how to help.
Yeah, very good. What concerns you?
I think the big concern I have is the world is not an equitable place. How do we break the barriers so that these amazing medical innovations that we're talking about are not just restricted to the rich countries? Even if you take the COVID vaccine, only the rich countries have access to the COVID vaccine. A lot of the poorer countries don't have the money to buy or are waiting in line, because all the rich countries like our country, we've all gone and bought pre-booked stocks of these, vaccines. So this is a classic case of medical innovations not being evenly distributed. I know it's not exactly going to happen that you wave a magic wand and it happens that way, but one needs to be cognizant of how lucky we are and how much can we share with the people who are not as fortunate or with countries that are not as fortunate.
Yeah, I think I was a bit surprised. I interviewed Julio Martinez Clark a few episodes back, and he had said in Latin America, they could wait anywhere from 5 to 10 years for anything that's currently coming out in terms of diagnostic devices and things like that. And it was just a really It was a surprising moment for me to hear, being somebody that grew up here in the United States, and I've certainly traveled the world, spent a fair amount of time in India and other countries. I've just never thought about that disparity until he happened to mention it as well. So for sure, it is a big concern around the world.
Right.
And what excites you?
I think the immense possibilities and the potential of what science and technology can do to make lives better and healthier, but also how we can reset all the harm that we have done to the world and the globe, the Mother Earth, in terms of pollution and all of that. So I think I see immense possibilities there. Secondly, is also think about the immense possibilities of the non-material aspects of life, of how one could just look inwards and do so much more than what we are even able to imagine. And so those two things excite me, the possibilities of science, the possibilities of spirituality, to make this a better world for all of us.
Yeah, it's for sure an exciting time, and definitely getting a bit more attention at the moment as well. So that is exciting for sure. Preveen Ramamoorthy, thank you so much for spending time with me today on the podcast. I greatly appreciated our conversation, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Don. It was an honor, a privilege, and just an amazing opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.